Are you ready to start to look at some of the challenges you faced in your life and use those challenges to help find who you are? Are you ready to come to terms with some of those challenges that you've had and how they've affected you? All right. This is part two of a three-part series. Welcome to Mystical Journeys with Jase. Part one, looking for the pattern of challenges. All right. Let's start with looking at the challenge side of your self-discovery statement. The challenge side is pretty difficult. Now, let me say this at the beginning. It's going to seem similar to working with your shadow self, but I'm going to say that for the moment, just put that aside because we're going to be doing some episodes on shadow work, and the shadow work is dealing with those parts of yourself that you need to take a look at. But looking at the challenge side of your life is looking at the pattern that you've already walked. So let's begin. Take a look at an earlier part of your life where something caused you to be knocked off center or where you allowed yourself to be pulled off center. What you want to do is to start to look at all those items. Yes, and I do mean taking inventory. Welcome to those negative things that happened to you. Like you could say, well, when I was younger, I used to fight a lot with my brother or sister, or I had a parent or two that were really hard on me. And what we're looking for, and it's going to take some time to sort through enough items in your life, is you want to look for where the challenges have had repetition in your life. All right, let me explain that. Let's say that over and over again, you keep recreating the same kinds of relationships. Over and over again, you keep taking the same types of jobs. Over and over again, you find yourself in similar situations. Well, let's take a look at that for the moment. Why is that? Because those are some of the challenges in your life, and you're going to keep doing them again and again until you can finally recognize that they are there. And part of the recognition that they are there is becoming aware of them. Okay, let's start taking a look. I'll give you an example. So, when I was dating in my late teens and going into my 20s and things like that, I started to notice that I was always attracted to people who had some really hard stories. And they were telling me about how hard their life was or something like that. And I started to notice that when a person would tell me about how hard they had it, I always felt really bad for them. And I started to notice that, wow, in these different relationships, this person had a tough time. Yes, I was probably doing the rescue. Well, I'm not going to say that I wasn't, but as I went along and I just discussed my dating history a bit, I went along and I started to find that over and over again, I would meet these people that they were really sure that what they did was right. They were really sure that their life was the right one or their viewpoint was the right one and things like that. And so I started to notice, there's a pattern in this. Was I attracting these people? Yeah, I could say I probably was. Was it because of something that I wanted? Or was it something that I was just willing to put up with? So let's start taking a look at finding some examples of those challenges. A first example is that I tend to hang out with people in their similar situations to mine. Okay, so that's a good one. And in work situations, I also found that I had some bosses who were pretty tough. And I'd end up working for them and I would try so much harder to make it work. Okay, there's another part. As I got older in my life and I got onto more mature relationships, I started to notice that those patterns were repeating. And so, what you want to do is make a list of maybe 10 or 15 things that happened to you, especially if it's something that you allowed to happen to you. And I'm not saying like a really bad situation, I'm saying something Like you made a choice to go down that particular path. Okay. So start with that. Get the first 10 to 15 items on that list. And here's what I want you to start with is I want you to start to condense it a little bit. And I want you to look at essence number one of that challenge. And essence number one is okay, first, what is the pattern I have here? And see if you can take the first couple from the early part of your life and condense it down to what is this pattern? Okay, let me give some examples here. Here's three challenge essences. Challenge essence one. So I'm going to work with my own situation. I realized that my father was really hard on my mother. I don't want to get into a lot of details about that, but I'm going to say it was pretty rough. What did I learn from that at that time period? I learned to be afraid. I learned that even if you try really hard, life is still going to bang you around. Remember that thing that I remembered when I was with the basin of water? I learned that the reward for my efforts was often something bad. Okay, so let's look at that a little bit. If you start to see that every time you made a positive effort and were rewarded with something negative, that's something to take a look at. And so the first essence is in my situation, I've spent time trying to give my all to somebody or some situation where the reward was a lot of negativity. So that's the first part you have to write down. Okay. Challenge essence number two. So now that I have that one down, then I go to my middle years and I start to look at that. And the second part ends up being I chose careers that were something where I realized I was getting around people who were managers that weren't really empowered. They definitely weren't very empowered individuals. They were just there for the ride. And what I ended up noticing was I was always the one who went the extra effort to try and help them, to try to help them understand what was going on. So even when they really didn't have an idea of what they needed to do, I ended up trying to insert myself. And I thought, okay, here we go. Here's a way to do this. Here's a better way, and things like that. Okay. So let's get to essence number two. There were times in my life when I chose situations with very disempowered people because I thought that just by me giving my effort could actually turn the situation around. Okay. Challenge number three, as far as the essence. So let's go to number three. We're getting a little bit later in life. Later on, you end up getting into marriage or relationships or situations with your family or something like that. And you start to look at what's going on there. And at that moment, I started to notice, even though I was learning a lot of things, I kept thinking, wow, these people who are really hurt or damaged or whatever, I could do my best to help them. Now, let me give you an example. Along that same thread, there are the same people who are also very, very certain in their belief system that they were right, that whatever religion that they had was the correct one, and I was wrong. So, what did I end up doing with that? I ended up realizing that the more that I was with people like that, I kept on trying and trying harder. Well, here's something really interesting. I learned a lot about self help that can help you. I ended up getting into friendships and relationships with people who were 100% certain they were right. It didn't matter what their logic was. What that ended up doing was it pulled me into trying to put my efforts towards helping them. Now, that's still a pretty good thing to do, but what I ended up doing was I was giving away more and more of my energy. So, essence number three, what ended up happening was connecting into relationships where people were very impossible in their belief systems, and me trying to correct that. All right, let's start working on this next part. Building the core challenge statement. Okay, so let's take a look at this. If I take those three essences, I'm going to try to find out the core statement of my challenge side. Look how often I picked situations where I thought that just my effort could really change people or change that situation or change an outcome. So my challenge side starts to look like this. I often found myself in situations where I allowed others and their perceptions to alter my set of beliefs or perceptions. Huh, take a look at that. Wow, how about that? Just to really start to see the beginning of some of the patterns that I wove for myself. When you start to see those patterns, you're going to immediately want to fix them. But what I'm going to say is keep on going. Take it the rest of the way. Take it all the way up to modern day and see those patterns you brought yourself into. Now, one thing I can say is when I started to see those patterns, that's when I started to come to the conclusion like, wow, huh, I really made some pretty rough choices based on a lot of things that happened to me. One of the most important things to know about the challenge side is this is going to open things up for you to realize that those challenges are the invitations for you to do something that maybe you're used to doing, or you've been conditioned, or by the way, people have convinced you to do things. And I'm beginning to say that there will be the beginning right now of taking that part of your life back. Because once you have that challenge statement and you can go and work with the actual challenge statement, you're going to be able to have a power because it's going to always be in front of you and you're always going to be able to see, hey, wait a second here. This is not right. Okay, let's get to the next part. You ready? It's time to ignore the invitations. Yes. It's time to ignore the invites of the things that were part of your challenge patterns. Okay. Now, this one is very tough to do. Keep in mind, I took a very long time to come up with that challenge statement. So once you get the core of that challenge statement, it makes things a lot better. So you just got your self statement of who you are and who your core is. You also got part of your self statement on what the challenge side is. What are the things that pulled you off center? So let's start taking a look at the challenge side first, since this is what this episode is about. Ever since I became aware of the challenges that I had allowed myself to partake in, I realized that in life, there are a lot of invitations that are going to happen to you that are going to try to keep pulling you back into those challenges. It could be some of the things that are legal and some things are illegal, some mental patterns that are bad for you, some physical patterns that are bad for you, some relationship patterns that are bad for you. So, what I want you to do is know that you've always been a participant in those patterns. Let's accept that. All right. Step one. First step is going to be accepting the responsibility. Look, I did these things, and here's how I allowed myself to be pulled off center. Step two. The second step ends up being remember that there are going to be invitations to go back to that wrong that you were. Yes, I really mean that. You're going to get those invitations to go back to that wrong self. What I want you to do is deny those invitations. Okay. So that's why the challenge side is so important, that you really take some time on it and really get it understood. Because for the most part, you've never really looked at your challenge side. You've never seen the patterns that got you where you are in your life. I have a friend of mine. She is a really giving person. And in her really giving nature, she ends up attracting a tremendous amount of people who are takers. She spent years just giving and giving and giving, and then going further and trying to give some more. Well, let's take a look at that. If we could look at that challenge side of it, what is the essence of that challenge? I'll just use a statement that would be pretty applicable to her. I've allowed my giving nature to be abused by people who are takers. Wow. Sit with that one for a moment. How many of us can identify with that one? So once she started to understand about how people were taking so much of her energy from her, that's when the beginning starts, where she starts to see the invitations of the people that are around her. And she came to the conclusion that, wow, there are like 10 people in her life that are takers around her. Now, that's quite an undertaking. We're going to tackle some of them in the next episode. All right. This part, building your challenge statement. Let's get back to building statements about the challenges. One of the most important things to realize is that this statement has to begin with how you've allowed things to happen. Yes, I'm going to say it. It's not going to be easy to look at these situations that have happened. Was it in your control? I'm sorry. What was in your control? What wasn't in control? If it ends up something that was inside your control, then it's something that you allowed to happen. If you were in a job and you had the opportunity to take a different job, yes, it might be $2 less an hour than your current job, but you still didn't take it. That is the action of allowing that situation to continue. So when you're coming up with a challenge statement, there are going to be places you allowed life to go in that direction where it was in your control. The things that happened to you that were out of your control, we can tackle those with the results that you're going to work towards from working on your shadow self. But for the moment, let's focus on one part. What are the things you allowed to happen that you really could have made a decision about sooner, or a choice a little bit earlier? So let's try to get in on a couple of those. And once you started to see that, you're going to see that you've already built a life pattern of challenges that were sent to you. And then instead of you working at 90 degrees from them and working to get away from them, you continue to allow them to happen. Now, like I said, this is not easy work, but we're trying to identify that pattern. All right, the work for this week. So we're going to wrap up today's episode a little bit early. I want you to work on trying to get 4 to 10 places where you've allowed yourself to be pulled off center. And then I want you to come up with an essence of that and try to narrow it down. And when you get that essence, I would like you to start with something like, these are the parts of my life where I allowed myself to be pulled off center. Here's the things that I allowed to happen. That's all I want you to work on this week. Just work on that. I want you to be able to get that statement because it's going to be something that's going to be a little tough to think about this week. Next week's episode will help to tie all this together. There's so much information about what to do about these things. So keep working on that challenge statement. Get that statement. I know we're in a little bit of a tough spot here, but I believe in you. And people always say that good medicine often tastes bad. Well, I can say that this is going to be a situation similar to that. It's going to take an honest look at yourself and looking at some of the hard things. It's not going to taste very good. It's going to taste pretty bad. But we're going to work here in the very near future to be self aware of those situations so that these situations are not going to be distracting us from life force. We're going to start learning to find the ways to ignore the invitations and ignore those situations and move forward. Okay. Anyhow, we'll get to that in the next episode. First off, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for hitting that follow button so you can see everything show up in your library. Thanks for being here. You know, if this episode or any other episodes really resonate with you, please tell a friend about this podcast. Send them the link. It can help to do this work with a friend. I believe in the importance of this work, and I'm happy to help. Just reach out to me from the website and we can talk about it directly. As always, thank you.